Hello and welcome to the first of our three-part series of webinars. This first webinar covers our new Universal DDI offering. I'm Cricket Liu, Infoblox's Chief Evangelist, and I am joined today by Dave Signori, our Vice President of Product Management for DDI. Dave, it's good to have you.
Good to be here, Cricket. Thank you.
Now, Dave's going to take us through a presentation on Universal DDI, and then we'll be joined by a special guest to talk about his experience with the product. Dave, take it away.
Thank you, Cricket. This is the first part of a three-part series. We're going to be introducing our Universal DDI product suite today, and today we're going to be focusing on the Universal DDI portion of that. As Cricket mentioned, here will be your presenters today, and I'll be starting us off. So what I want to start off with is I'm going to talk about market trends, and I'm going to talk about some of the challenges that we've seen out there, and then I'll get into what the product is, right? And then I'll even do a demo here in a minute too. So if you start off with the market trends, multi-cloud majority. What we mean by that is that our customers and the enterprise industry, we're beginning to see that they're not just having one public cloud or hypervisor vendor, they're having more than one, right? So these are multiple cloud environments that we're seeing out there. And by 2026, we're expecting 90% of enterprises will be there, right? And that's up from 76% in 2020. So they're doing this for their digital transformation, and they're adding this to their current on-prem footprint. So managing critical network services like DNS, DHCP, IPAM in these diverse environments, more than one public cloud and on-prem, is driving complexity. All right. Another trend we're seeing is cloud first or SaaS first strategy. And you can see here more than 85% of organizations are going to embrace a cloud first principle by 2025. They're basically trying to get away from managing infrastructure. So a lot of the cloud teams prefer to have local network services, right? Not to be managing appliances and infrastructure, that sort of thing. Another thing that's accelerating this was COVID, right? But also, the rising cost of VMware. Broadcom is kind of accelerating, pushing a lot of your infrastructure into public cloud also. And then lastly, just simply increased cyber threat risk, right? The average cost of a data breach, $4.5 million in 2023. When you have these diverse environments, it even makes it more difficult to manage this, right? So these are some trends that we're seeing, and based on these trends, with the push to multi-cloud, these are some challenges that we're seeing, right? We've talked to hundreds of our customers to validate this, and so I'm going to touch on each one of these. And I'll focus a little bit more on the ones that are around Universal DDI, right? Not the other two areas of it. So the first one is human mistakes. So human mistakes causing outages. Now, when you have multiple clouds, and in many cases, in some cases, sometimes even multiple DNS systems on-prem, right? Managing those multiple DNS systems is going to increase the likelihood of errors, right? And these are not minor errors, right? They can be pretty costly. One of our customers, banking customer, was set up where they were using Infoblox on-prem. They had a different team that was managing their DNS in one of the public cloud vendors. They were relying on different teams, manual processes. Someone typed a record in incorrectly, and it caused an outage for 4 hours. It's that sort of thing that we're seeing here, right? Second thing here that we're going to talk about is increased cost. So when you're using 4 or 5 DNS systems, that means you are using multiple user interfaces, multiple APIs, multiple automation tools, right? And then when you think about it, you basically have separate teams performing the same function across different environments, right? Third item here that we're seeing that's causing challenges is suboptimal usage of IP blocks, right? Private IP space is precious. When you get into these multiple cloud environments, in many cases, the network team may still own IPAM, but the public cloud teams are coming to IPAM to get blocks of IP addresses. And in many cases, the network team, once they give them out, has no idea whether it was the right size. They have no visibility into how they're being used. Cloud team may come back again for another request, and the network team has no idea whether they're making good use of those resources. One of our public cloud vendors reported out to us, partners reported out to us, that of all the subnets that are defined by their customer base, they're only on average 10% used. And if you're in a Kubernetes environment, they're only 0.1% used. So that's a challenge there. Fourth one here is IP conflicts, right? Overlapping IP addresses, which could cause outages, right? So without clear visibility of what you have in your IPAM, in your IP address environment, in your subnets, right, across your different clouds, there is a risk of creating conflicts, right? Originally, a lot of these deployments were isolated in just a public cloud environment. Now they're hybrid multi-cloud. They're gonna go over a couple public cloud environments. They'll go from private to public, that sort of thing, and that's going to cause a problem. One of our customers, right? They basically, the cloud team got a little bit careless in deploying subnet without checking in with the network team. They're basically, this is an effort to try to be more agile. They're trying to take the advantage of public cloud, and it led to an outage. All right. And the last item here I'll mention briefly, we're not lingering on it too much in this presentation, so you want to stay tuned for the next episode when we get into asset visibility. But we do see it as a challenge out there, is basically a couple things: outdated or dangling DNS records, sometimes called a dangling CNAME, where records get provisioned, and then when the IP or application gets deprovisioned or pulled away, they don't clean up the DNS records. That can cause potential security vulnerabilities. And the other thing is basically what we call zombie resources, where it's unused servers or other resources that are out there consuming resources, incurring costs, and our customers are having difficulty seeing those, right? So all these things are basically underscoring the importance of effective multi-cloud critical network services management. So what is Infoblox launched here? It is our Universal DDI product suite, and as we mentioned, it's going to come out in three. We have three presentations coming out, presentation series. This first one, we're going to focus on the Universal DDI management, right? And that's what we're going to talk about in the presentation, and we'll do a little bit of a demo there too. Next, in our next series or next episode, we'll be covering Universal Asset Insights, and the one after that, we'll be covering NIOS X as a service. But a couple of things to point out here is that what the Universal DDI product suite is giving you is not just management of Infoblox DNS, DHCP, IPAM, but third-party DNS, DHCP, and IPAM. So you can see that in the middle lower right, where we will be managing Bind, AWS Route 53, Azure DNS, Microsoft, do it from an Infoblox user interface, as well as managing our own servers. Our latest generation of protocol servers is NIOS X. This Universal DI management will also manage classic NIOS. So thousands of NIOS customers out there. If you have multiple NIOS grids out there, you can get all that managed under one umbrella also. Okay, all managed from the Infoblox portal. So you'll get more on some of those other details later, but I'm gonna dig into the Universal DDI currently, that product line. Before I go there, quick plug in on, hey, there's also Universal Asset Insights, and that's our ability to gather all of your infrastructure, regardless of where it is, public cloud, private cloud, IoT, third-party tools, on-prem, and pull that all into our IPAM. All right. So here's what Universal DDI management is in a nutshell. So currently over on the left, what you're seeing is basically split up by network and public cloud. So you have a network team, maybe multiple responsibilities, roles there. Some are responsible for Microsoft DNS management, DHCP. Some are managing your Infoblox or another vendor. Some are managing your external DNS, whether it's Cloudflare, Akamai, right? Potentially different tools doing these things. Then over on your cloud side, right? There's a public cloud team, probably a cloud team for each hyperscaler that you're managing that is managing your DNS in those areas as well, okay? What Universal DDI Management gives you is a single place from the Infoblox portal to manage all these things. It manages classic NIOS. It manages NIOS X as a service. It manages all your DNS and IPAM across your public cloud vendors. It manages your external DNS vendors, right? Our vision is for that, Akamai and Cloudflare, for example, right? And on-prem DNS, DHCP, Bind, Microsoft. The whole idea is your SecOps, your DevOps, your SecOps, your CloudOps, your NetOps, all has a single place to manage, single control plane, single place to automate, to manage your critical network services. All right. So let me give you a little taste of what the demo looks like. So this is the Infoblox portal demoing the Universal DDI product suite. I'm going to focus on the Universal DDI management components of this. So what I want to start with is in basically discovery. So when you're using the product, you can pull all of your assets and your DNS records in from a wide variety of places, right? This is an example of pulling some in from classic NIOS grids, right? I can also pull from third party, right? But what I'm going to focus on right now is pulling in from public cloud. I have a couple jobs here that I'll focus on. One of them is this AWS discovery, and we'll just take a look at some of the things that you can do here. So first of all, you can specify a wide variety of ways for your credentials. So we make it easy for you to choose the way you'd like this to happen, right? Using principal ID here, but you basically pass us the API keys. And we can also set this up so we're discovering across multiple subscriptions. Some of our customers have thousands of subscriptions, so we make it very easy for you to do that. Likewise, and this will come out more in the next episode when we talk about asset insights, we are allowing you to choose to exclude some of the asset types that we're going to pull in. We pull in all these asset types along with all of their subnet and IP address information, right? And then finally, if you have DNS discovery enabled, we're pulling in all of the DNS zones and records also. And you can have this set up where do you just want us to read it, or do you want us to be able to control these as well? And you can define which DNS view you want these to go into. Likewise, you could use these private hosted zones as forwarding zones, and we can also discover cloud forwarders, or sometimes called API endpoints, that sort of thing. Okay. And we have basically something completely similar over on the Azure side. So I won't linger on this too long, but we have a different set of asset types based on the asset types that Azure has, and we can pull in those DNS records also. So in the end, after we do the discovery, we have lots of assets, and in the next presentation, we'll go into of how we are classifying zombie assets. Although I will point out from an IPAM standpoint that when we discover IP records that aren't represented in your IPAM, right, we are letting you know that if we find an IP address that doesn't have a DNS record associated with it, if we find an IP address that you don't have marked as having a DHCP lease or a private or a fixed address or a reservation, that means your IPAM is not accurate, and we're giving that information right up front. So a lot more about that when we get to asset insights, but I did want to mention that we're keeping IPAM up to date in this regard. So let's say, hypothetically, you needed to go and update, make some updates to DNS records in AWS and Azure for a hybrid multi-cloud application. And I'll show you what this looks like in a minute. If you didn't have this tool, what you'd end up doing is so we're imagining that we are having to go update a particular zone called AWS mycorp.com. Now, as an AWS cloud team, here's multiple subscriptions here. I'm not even sure which one I'm supposed to log into that is managing that zone, right? So if I'm looking for that particular one, here are my hosted zones. I can say, it's not this one, right? So must be something else. This is part of the challenge that you would be having if you had if you were using the native tools. and you finally see, okay, here it is, awsmycorp.com. That's the one that I wanted to modify, and it's app 1 is the record, right? So I'm choosing app 1. I'm going to edit this record, and then I could make a modification to this if I wanted to, right? That's what the team would have to do. And if they were coordinating this across the network team would have to make a request to the AWS team, maybe open a ticket, wait for it to happen, and then hopefully they're expecting that this person's going to have enough DNS knowledge to be able to do this correctly, right? Same thing over on the, and I canceled out of that. Same thing over on the Azure side. Now, Azure does give you the ability to see all the zones across your accounts, but it does split it out by public and private zones. So if I come here to public, say up, I don't have it there. That's not the place. I need to go into my private zones, and here it is. It's the Azure MyCorp. That's the one that I want to edit. And again, completely different user interface, different tool, right? I need to know that I need to go down into DNS management, record sets, and here it is. App 1 is the record I want to modify. And if I needed to change this, I would come in here and make the change and do what I needed to do there, right? But I'm gonna discard that as well. So that's what it would look like, right? Without having universal DDI management. With universal DDI management, once I've run the discovery, and the discovery runs on a regular basis, I can now come in here and configure. If I go to DNS, I am now seeing my my DNS views here. So if I go to this AWS, here are all the zones across all of this, all the subscriptions. So it's much easier for me to manage this. And if I go into this private hosted zone here, it's not just the fact that I'm looking at the zone. I can actually come in here and look at my DNS servers and map those zones to here. So if I wanted to serve this private hosted zone that's also is served in AWS from an Infoblox server, I could do that also, right? But in order to change this record, all I've got to do is come in here to AWS, right? There's my app 1 record, right? And I'm going to edit this, and I'm going to change this IP address, 1115, and save and close. And that is done, right? Now, if I want to do the same thing over on the Azure side, again, same workflow, same UI. You could obviously automate all this with automation scripts. And I'll go ahead and update this as well, and save and close. Right, and those records have now been updated. So I'll just take a quick proof of this. You can see here that the app 1 was at 220. Okay, and if I refresh this, it's now 115. Right, so this is a real AWS account. I just updated that DNS record using the Infoblox portal, right? And I would get the same thing over on the Azure side too. It's currently it was 150 when we started this. I'm going to refresh it, and now it's 220. Right, flipped it over. Okay, so that's what we mean by universal DNS. I can manage the Infoblox servers. I can manage AWS DNS. I can manage Azure DNS. And the last thing I'll point out is under the IPAM, right? Because universal DDI management does include IPAM. Here I can show you an example of just the IPAM. We're going into this particular address block that's been discovered. These subnets all discovered right out of AWS, and then within those subnets, you can see individual IP addresses discovered. In this case, this is VPC endpoints. So as these things are discovered, they're brought into IPAM and reflected, so you know that your IPAM is always completely up to date. Okay, so just a little taste of that. The one other thing I do want to mention is in the universal IPAM capability. There's something very unique that we do there called IPAM Federation. And then what we're doing here, if I go and take a look at federated realms, is we're giving you the ability to basically allow a NIOS administrator to manage IPAM, a GCP administrator to manage IPAM there, right? But we are providing federated control of it so that you can define a realm that may encompass GCP, NIOS, Universal DDI, define certain blocks of addresses that are not allowed to overlap or that are allowed to overlap, and then we're able to enforce that. So this federated block, for instance, these subnets right here are actually owned by the NIOS administrator. If there were subnets that were owned by a GCP administrator, you'd see that GCP designation. These are being managed local and universal DDI. But if somebody went into universal DDI and tried to create a 10.10.10 IP address, they would say, can't do that. The NIOS admin already has control of that. So some very, very cool features on managing universal IPAM and maintaining a federated control for that. Okay, so just wanted to show you a few different areas of that demo. I'm gonna flip back over to summarize this, and then I'll pass it back to Cricket and Chris here in a second. Okay, so to summarize, these are the key differentiators that we look at as being unique in the industry. All right. So first of all, Universal DDI Management is the only full SaaS DNS DDI management product on the market, right? And one thing that I didn't mention earlier, when you have SaaS, what this means is that when we do this discovery across these multiple public cloud vendors, across classic NIOS grids, we basically have no scale limitations because there are no appliances there. So elastic scaling and completely eliminating your customer maintenance burdens. They don't have to worry about upgrading or HA and that sort of thing. The second one, as I mentioned towards the end of the demo, is the universal IPAM solution, right? That is unique, that you can define policy across your entire estate for where subnets and network IP address ranges are allowed to overlap, not overlap, even if it's in an IPAM system that is not Infoblox, but that we're managing, right? And then lastly, we want to point out the fact that it is the industry's only hybrid multi-cloud DNS management from a single workflow. What I mean by that is that we can manage DNS from third party, we can manage our own DNS, manage our own IPAM. It's all embedded in a single system. There may be some tools out there that will only manage or only serve DNS, but we do both, all in a single workflow. All right. So that concludes the presentation standpoint. I'm going to introduce Cricket and Chris, and we'll start the interview portion of the program.
All right. Thanks so much, Dave. That was really interesting. We are so happy to have Chris Hindy with us today for a little Q&A. Chris, great to see you again.
Great to see you, Cricket. Dave, great to see you as well.
Hey, Chris is the Senior Vice President of Product Innovation and Strategy with Empowered Networks, a Sapphire Infoblox partner based in Toronto and Ottawa, Canada. Chris brings 25 years of IT operations, product management, and leadership experience to the team, with progressive experience with startups, carriers, Silicon Valley, software firms, and high-value resellers. Chris is focused on practical solutions to operational problems. And in his spare time, Chris enjoys learning more about wine production, working on classic Jeeps, and traveling to lonely places across North America. I feel like I should ask about that last one. But before we get to that, Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit more about Empowered Networks and the type of customers that you serve?
Sure. So Empowered Networks is a company here in Canada that services the market around North America. And we're focused on what we call network intelligence. This is the notion of bringing together all of the core network knowledge assets, things like DNS records and discovery information, and that's delivered by different platforms, into a fused whole that really tells the true story of the overall state of your network. Some of the kinds of customers that we deal with, we have a number of customers that are large financial companies, banks, insurance companies, things like that. We do some work with some of the large consulting and advisory firms, manufacturing companies, federal and state and local governments, education sector. So lots of people who have lots of complex and complicated needs for better intelligence around their network.
Fantastic. Chris, are there many of your clients who are utilizing hybrid or multi-cloud environments? And if so, what challenges do they see from trying to manage such complex infrastructure?
Absolutely. Multi-cloud is very much something we see on a regular basis with our customers. It used to be that you'd show up and talk to a customer and ask about cloud and say, yeah, we use a little AWS, or yeah, we've got Office 365. But now we have several very key business apps in Azure and several in AWS, and we're using some GCP over here, and we've got on-premise Kubernetes, and we've got on-premise VMware or OpenStack or things like that. So certainly we see lots of people who need to be able to communicate across multiple cloud providers, whether those are internal, external, or otherwise. And also many of our customers need to deal with things on the mainframe side of the shop as well. Mm-hmm. So very complex environments that we're seeing in the user space.
Yeah. And how many different, for example, DNS management tools or DNS platforms are they using, and how does that add complexity?
So if I just think about one customer that we're working with right now, we're in the process. It's a large financial company in the Southeast. We're working with them to implement classic NIOS across their facilities, but they also use Azure DNS. They use AWS Route 53. They have a large Microsoft DNS presence. I think they may have some bind kicking around somewhere in the back office somewhere. They've got a little bit of QIP. They've got a little bit of everything, right? And that's very much a story that we see when we talk to a number of our customers. Federal government departments are kind of classic for this as well. They've got all kinds of different providers out there. So I would say 3 to 4 different DNS providers in the typical environment is not uncommon at all. And then if you also consider things that they've layered on top of just the service provision aspects, things like IPAM tools from various vendors like SolarWinds or other vendors like that, you're gonna get a very large set of tooling that people need to get their arms around to just run day-to-day operations.
Yeah. Are there any specific problems or challenges you think Universal DDI might be able to help them with?
Yeah, I'm very excited about what UDDI can bring to this problem, especially, right? So just the notion of being able to get your arms around all of these different sets of zones and records in one place is fantastically valuable, right? From an auditability point of view, from an operational situational awareness point of view, just making sure that everybody's on the same page when it comes to what zones, where are they, what technology is underpinning them, who's using them, who's updating them, how often have they been touched, and are we making the best utilization out of names and addresses. I think those are all very key capabilities. And I think the other thing that's really interesting here is while UDDI brings a very compelling user experience and management surface, you don't necessarily need to shift people off of their existing management experience, right? So if you've got a cloud team that's doing stuff in a very highly automated Terraform-like way, or using a lot of Ansible to roll their stuff out, you don't have to try and force fit that team into using the Infoblox solution. But you have a place where everybody can kind of commune around the contents of the various systems and have good visibility. So things like change planning will become a heck of a lot easier. And recovering from those long 4-hour outages that Dave mentioned with another financial customer, just because you can see where all this stuff is and understand how to glue it back together when it breaks.
Yeah, that's one of the things I think that Dave showed off nicely in the demo, is that even though we're using our user interface to make changes, for example, to zones that are hosted on Route 53 or Azure DNS, you can still use the native interfaces too. The synchronization is bidirectional, so you kind of have peaceful coexistence, if you will, between the two interfaces. Yeah. So I know you were an EAP participant at Empowered, right? You guys were part of our early access program.
Yep.
Is there a positive impact that the new features and functionality in Universal DDI had on your environment?
Yeah. So let me just set the scene a little bit around our participation. So we were looking at the EAP, the Early Access Program, kind of from two different angles. One was as a practitioner who implementing DNS systems with customers. The other is as a, not just a hair club president, also a client. So we wanted to be, see how that we were going to use UDDI in our own operations. And as we roll out more and more SaaS offerings ourselves to our customers, having the capabilities that UDDI brings to the table is pretty interesting and compelling for us. So we have the exact same problems that many of our customers do, right? We have offerings that are on GCP, that are on AWS, that are on Azure. Plus, we have back office stuff that runs on classic NIOS and on NIOS X. So being able to see all of that stuff in one place is a key capability for us. And as many of our clients experience, the folks that run our operations day to day, while they're experienced and certainly enthusiastic, they sometimes don't have all the experience that you would want frontline folks to have. So giving them a little bit of a safety net around some of the technology that maybe they didn't see in college, the classic NIOS and related, I don't want to say older, but mature, let's say, technologies, is pretty compelling as well, right? They have a single place to go. They have a single way of taking action. We can write change tickets based on a consistent user experience when we need to make some of those manual changes. So that was all very interesting for us as consumers of UDDI. And then from the point of view of being practitioners, I think where we're going to see a lot of uptake or where our customers are starting to implement zero trust frameworks, where they're starting to think about mesh networking, and being able to support these different network topologies and network service access models, again, with a consistent user experience, and also deal with some of the needs for high automation environments. I think that's going to be something very compelling for a number of our customers.
Yeah. I think this is the only webinar I've ever been on where we've actually plugged the Hair Club for Men. I think that's a first for me. So it sounds like a lot of what Universal DDI stands to do is to sort of simplify and streamline operations between your cloud and your networking teams, right? That's a lot of the potential. If you're large enough actually to have separate cloud and network teams.
And I think really some of the people who are going to be most interested in Universal DDI beyond just sort of the operational community are those folks that are in the global risk and compliance areas, right? So the people that are charged with taking care of your ISO 27001, your SOC 2, and being able to continue to keep those trust centers up to date and accurate, because now you've got a single way to audit all of that activity and all of that content in one place. So you can send the auditor into a Universal DDI interface and say, here's all the information you need to give us the thumbs up for our SOC 2.
Yeah.
Yep. That piece right there is going to be emphasized quite a bit in the next presentation round too. So if you're watching this one, be sure to check out the asset insights, because pulling in for compliance reasons is going to be one of the main use cases for that part of the feature set also.
Yeah. Got to collect all three, right?
Yep.
Series. So Chris, If you were talking to a customer about Universal DDI, what do you think you would do to position its overall value? What's the most important part of Universal DDI's value?
So I think it starts with understanding how a customer approaches the whole issue of DNS in the first place. And we have a fairly structured methodology, as you know, around first assessing how our customers are engaging on some of these core technology conversations around cloud, around mainframe and data center, around how they're home running stuff and dealing with mainframe and engaging with third parties and stuff like that. So it starts by really understanding how the whole thing is glued together. But then I think the conversation really quickly gets to, look, you've got an AWS team that's running your A, B, and C applications for your large company, and you've got an Azure team over here who's running your D, E, and F applications. They don't talk to each other, and neither of them talk to the core network guys who have to run all of the inventory and back end and parts management and MRO and all the other kinds of lines of business applications that these applications may reach into. And then I think it's just a conversation at that point saying, what if you could have everything in one place? I think the other angle I was thinking about as Dave was speaking, we have another customer who's in global logistics, and they're very typical in that they grow very much through acquisition. So I think the conversations around, we just acquired this company and we need their stuff to work with stuff from this other company that we acquired 6 months ago, because this company had half the solution and this one had half the solution. And now if we can glue them together, it'll be both. So I think being able to have the conversation that says, well, we can make that happen a whole lot more quickly just by managing cloud to cloud, as opposed to you having to go off and refactor the application. We can get you at least to a stage 1 integration, and then you can figure out if you want to lift and shift or migrate some of that application, the moving parts, into a different deployment pattern or something like that. So I think that's an interesting angle to look at as well. How does the time efficiencies start to stack up? And then I think the third one Dave mentioned as well, the whole notion of scarcity of IP space. So certainly we have a number of customers, 4 or 5 that I can think of off the top of my head, who have already or are thinking about how they monetize public IPv4 space. This being a fairly important and scarce commodity these days. So I can think of one of our customers who was able to vacate an entire /8 and were able to monetize that towards another cloud provider, as an example. And I know we have another carrier partner customer that's on a similar mission. Actually, I was just at a university here in Canada 2 weeks ago because they have a very nice block, /16 block, that they want to see if they can monetize to help with their funding. I think that's another angle that's going to be an interesting conversation for folks around UDDI, because now we can gather all that information again from all those disparate systems, get it in one place, and say, okay, now we can create a plan to actually migrate you out of this /16 entirely, and then you can do with it as you like.
Yeah, that could be a pretty penny. I mean, if they were able to free up an entire /8, I just Googled it, and apparently the price per IPv4 address now it has gotten to between $43 and $52. So if you're talking, 16 million IP addresses times $50, that is a huge amount of money. Yeah, that's amazing. It's almost $1 billion. Yeah, even with Canadian dollars, that's a lot of money.
Yeah. Well, we get paid in waffles and maple syrup, but that's okay.
Just one more question for you, Chris, and this is about success metrics. And you actually sort of touched on this, but I wondered whether there were particular success metrics like time savings or productivity gains that Universal DDI could help customers with.
Sure. I mean, you could very quickly get into, some fairly simple to understand metrics like how long does it take us to deliver a project? Can we shrink that time from 6 months to 3 months just by having more automation and more consistent application of the technology stack? But when I think about IT business metrics, I always come back to an example that I heard about from our friends at Disney. So they have the Disney Cruise Line folks have a metric that they call time to first margarita, which is a metric that expresses the amount of time it takes to get from the pier side as a parent with children who are going on the cruise with you to the bar and have your first margarita. And when you think about it for a second, okay, that sounds like a funny joke, and clearly somebody's just pulling your leg, right? But actually, when you think about it, there's a lot of moving parts in getting you, your bags, your passport, your children, your reservations, all those kinds of things from the pier side through check-in, through all of the magic happening, all the way up the gangway to your cabin in a timely fashion. And a lot of that requires applications. Those applications need DNS just to function. And so just by giving us that consistent surface, that auditability, that control, that ability to look at all the different DNS providers and thus all the moving parts in the solution, I think that's a metric that is interesting to track. Like, what's the time to first value if you want to take margarita, and how do you apply this technology to shrink that time down? I think that's something that a lot of people, when we speak to them, talk about in the abstract. But I think this is, I think UDDI really brings to the table some foundational change that is going to affect that type of metric very seriously.
Yeah. Well, that is a metric I can get behind. I'm a big fan. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for joining us and for sharing your experiences at Empowered. We really value you personally and also Empowered as a partner. For those of you who heard Dave talking about the next 2 webinars in a series, we would love to have you tune in. We have part 2, which is entitled Achieve Multi-Cloud Visibility, Customer's Path to Efficiency. This is all about asset insights, which is something that Dave talked about earlier, which I think is really, really interesting. And then finally, part 3, which is coming in the second half of December, let's say mid-December, is entitled Radical Simplicity, Deploy Critical Network Services in Minutes. And this is about fully SaaS deployments of DNS and DHCP, which will greatly reduce the amount of time it takes to stand up these critical network services. So please do tune into those. I think I'm going to be with you for all 3. Dave, are you on for all 3 of them as well?
I don't know yet. I'd be happy to do it, but I haven't heard.
All right. Well, thank you again, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you, Chris and Dave, for joining me, and hopefully we'll see you in November for part 2. Bye-bye.